generous action. Would we miss you if you were gone? If you didn't build this, would we miss it? So if you are busy interrupting people, and I got to tell you, I am spammed with every two-bit hustle you can imagine. People won't miss those when they go away, and they do go away. The people who get out on the other side are the ones who are step by step, generously shipping the work to a small group of people in the right genre, causing connection and conversation to happen, and then it grows.
So we're really talking about kind of almost creating a personal brand, isn't it? This is what this is about, like in a way. Is that right?
All right, so let's talk about brand. Brand is not logo. Hyatt hotels have a logo, but they don't have a brand. Mm-hmm. Nike has a logo, they have a brand. If Nike owned a hotel, you know exactly what it would be like. If Hyatt made sneakers, you have no idea, right? Okay. So a personal brand is simply a promise, an expectation. When I get on a podcast with you or read something you wrote or give you any form of my time, I have an expectation for what I'm going to get from you. That's your brand. Mm-hmm. And you can wreck your brand in one day if you want, but that's your brand. Most people don't have a brand. They just have a logo because I am not willing to give them enough of my time and attention for them to earn anything because they haven't shown up in a way to have gotten my time and attention.
People that listen to this, they may be thinking, if I go out and publish, how do I not ruin the brand in a day? Just like what you just said, it's like I don't want to ruin my brand in a day. So how do I avoid that?
Yeah. So the promise has to be very specific. If you promise that you are the most reliable, consistent, and trained heart surgeon in all of Tucson, and it's not true, you're doomed. Mm-hmm. If you promise that you're going to show up with something interesting that may or may not work for people on some fringe of something, you can keep that promise, mm-hmm. right? So think about, say, the early days of Bitcoin. The people during the early days of Bitcoin who showed up and promised a stable, reliable, predictable replacement for cash, they're all gone, right? That's Mt. Gox. It's gone because they couldn't keep their promise. On the other hand, if you show up and say, hey, I'm Mike Novogratz, I'm swinging big bats here, and this is the most volatile, weirdest thing ever, maybe I'll be able to double our money, the people who invest in you are like, go for it, Mike, because they knew what the promise was.
So then how do you come up with the ideas? The ideas of, because to write 7,000 posts, some days you must be sitting there thinking, what am I going to say today?
So I make
what's
these
your process?
I make these on my Glowforge. You can't see these on the podcast. They're going to be part of the launch of the book. And they're called writer's blocks. And I don't know if you can read it.
Yeah. And there's a video version of the podcast too, by the way, so they can see it.
This one is different, but this one says no such thing as writer's block. Writer's block is real, and there's no such thing. What people who say I don't have any ideas are actually saying is, I'm afraid of my bad ideas. Because everybody has bad ideas. And if I said, write down 99 bad ideas, I guarantee you at least 3 good ones will slip in. They will. So you don't have idea block. You're just afraid of bad ideas. Write down more ideas. Keep writing down ideas, and sooner or later a good one's going to show up.
And then the psychological part of it is that you have to be okay in choosing the best of those 99 and just publish.
Yep.
And just publish. And how long would you take to publish something? What's the time frame that somebody should have? Is it half an hour? Is it 6 hours? Is it 2 hours a day? Is it what is the amount of practice somebody should be putting out there?
Well, so I think different people have different postures, and I think it depends on what your idea looks like. If you are developing a pacemaker, I hope that you spend at least a year your idea to the world. Paul Graham, the great entrepreneur, founder of Y-Com. Paul, if you read his posts, at the bottom, he lists all the people he ran the post by before you read it, because he wrote a post once a month. I, on the other hand, have no one look at my blog posts before they're published. And every day I write 3 or 4, and you see the best one, right? The next best one that I've got. And the promise is really clear, which is if you don't like this, just wait till tomorrow, there'll be another one. And that promise enabled me to not have to sit with a post for a long time. If it's controversial, if I'm dealing with something where I'm over my head, I'll work on it for a month for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And other people will read it for sure. But my best blog posts, 20 minutes.
So you do take time if it's controversial because you don't want to risk the promise, the brand, right? And to say the wrong thing. And and I think if people are out there, because this comes to the imposter syndrome, which everyone has at all levels. It gets easier the more that you write, right? But it feels like
it only gets easier if you get lazy. Because, well, first, everyone's entitled to a microphone, but no one's entitled to an audience, and no one's entitled to applause. Mm-hmm. So just because there's a process doesn't mean it's going to work. Mm-hmm. It just means it's going to work better than if there isn't a process. So with that said, the thing about being an imposter is I feel like an imposter any day I'm doing good work. And if I don't feel that way, then I might be busy, but I'm not working very hard.
So you feel like an imposter anytime that you are doing great work. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Because I'm doing something that might not work. That's what it means to be creative. What it means to be creative is you are shipping generous work that might not work. Well, the stakes are much higher for me than they are for someone with 50 followers. So given how high the stakes are, and I'm working on something that might not work, of course I feel like an imposter because I've never done that before.
So you keep pushing yourself, and that's the creative part of it, isn't it? That's where that creative muscle almost starts to play. It's when you get into the zone almost, right? The flow state. And then all of a sudden stuff starts to come out from somewhere. Where is that place? What's that place called where things come?
One reason that rock stars burn out is they end up playing covers of themselves. That the audience doesn't want to hear the new album. The audience wants to hear their greatest hits. And so they stop, the Rolling Stones stop being the Rolling Stones and they start being a Rolling Stones cover band. And that's enervating because that's not what they signed up for. And so the dance is to figure out, how do I make a promise to people that I'm going to live on a frontier, and it might be interesting and it might not work. And I'll always do it with good intent, but your mileage may vary and you may not get the joke, and that's totally okay.
But so where do the creative ideas come from? Because like at the beginning of this, like you spoke about the muse, right? The muse that will come up with that idea. And I have found that, sometimes like I might be on the beach or like I might be out somewhere, something will pop into my mind that will change everything, right? And we're not talking about that right now, are we? That's something different, isn't it? Or is it similar? I don't know.
So the great Cory Doctorow, science fiction author, taught me last week, talent is just a skill we didn't realize we were practicing.
Talent is good.
What happened when that idea popped into your head is it was one of a parade of 1,000 ideas, but one of your filters highlighted it for you. And you didn't hear the other ones, but they were there. Good ideas are simply the iterative process of effort. And you might not be noticing the bad ideas, but they are definitely there.
I can confirm that, by the way. It's hard to get the good ideas though. And I think to that point, it does. So just to confirm, so people that ship creative work consistently will have the good ideas pop into their mind because of the work that they're shipping. And that it changes their psychology because the more they do it, the more experience they have, and the greater their context. Correct.
Absolutely correct. That flow comes from the work. The work doesn't come from flow.
So what about the Mad Men style creative ideas, right? Say, for example, if that was like your job, right? And you needed to come up with ideas that were not the same as everyone else. And that was your job, right? And I don't know, like it was like a logo design, or it was, I don't know, some story which you had to create, or it was like an ad, let's say, because this is like a marketing podcast as well. Like, how would you practice that kind of work, shipping that kind of work?
Well, the first thing is we need good taste. And to get good taste, we need to understand genre. And it means we have to have done the reading. You can't work on a logo without knowing who Paul Rand was, right? You can't work on a logo without having seen 1,000 logos. Otherwise, you're just an amateur, right? Once you understand the genre, then you can say, well, I see the terrain, and there's terrain over here that is largely unexplored, but because I understand the genre, drawing out what's on that terrain is really easy, right? It's really easy for someone who invents TV shows for a living to come up with MTV Cops. And if you come up with MTV Cops, you have Miami Vice, and suddenly you're a genius. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't very hard. The hardest part was other people had come up with Miami Vice before, but had discarded it because it felt too risky, because it felt too far afield from the junk that network TV was broadcasting. So he had the wherewithal to consistently, persistently get that show made without compromising it into just a version of Mannix, right? And so the original idea of Miami Vice took less than a minute to think up and less than half an hour to draw out. The hard work was not compromising after that in all respects. Like, what should be on the soundtrack, and what should be the color scheme, and why is it like this, and who is it for, and what do I say to the critic who doesn't get the joke, right? But those things are all executions on an insight that comes from a deep understanding of genre. Now, it is possible to just get lucky and show up with your thing out of the blue, but those people tend to be one-hit wonders because they don't have the discipline to keep doing that work with passion. And so the problem I have, other than the moral problem, with people who hustle is they're building their whole thing on the slimmest of ideas with almost no execution behind it. They lose interest after a few weeks. And that's not how you build something great. You know, if we think about, and I don't think Facebook is something great, but if your goal is to create a change in the culture or create a lot of money, Facebook had one idea for 100 people at Harvard, right? Actually, there's two ideas. Idea number one, you don't have a date. Idea number two, people are talking about you behind your back. You want to hear what they're saying? That's it. That's all Facebook is. And then 15 years of hard work.
And there's a few other things, but yeah, I get what you're saying. So you just talked about the risk of something. Say, for example, the Miami Vice, that was a risk, right? And it seems to be that like some of the best stuff feels inside of you a bit risky, right? So is risk a good sign that maybe this is the right path? And how do you know just when it's too far? It's too risky.
Exactly. So this is good taste. Good taste is knowing what your audience wants 3 minutes before they do. And if you do it 30 years before they do, then you will be ostracized because you went too far. If you do it 3 minutes after they do, no one cares. So the act of good taste, whether or not you use words to describe it to yourself, is knowing enough about the genre and your audience to be just far enough ahead. And all you have to do is, watch the cresting wave of YouTube or the cresting wave of the podcasting world to see the pace of what it means to be just a little bit ahead. And there are people who have gone too far, and so someone like Brian Eno. Brian Eno is respected and revered by a very small group of people. And it's a small group of people because he was too far ahead to get the masses to get his joke. But if you wanted to, you could have made a living just taking a Brian Eno idea and bringing it out a year later.
You talk about the audience as well. Yeah. So is it clearly defining the audience? Is that a really key part of this process? Is it clearly defining who you're talking to? Like, is that going to make it easy for people?
Yeah, it changes everything. And I think you can start by saying my audience is anyone who gets the joke. The problem with that is you have to then try a whole bunch of people before you figure out who your audience is. It makes way more sense. My friend Chip Conley built an entire chain of hotels in which every hotel was modeled after a magazine, because he figured if there's 1 million people who are reading Home and Garden, or 1 million people who are reading Fast Company, or 1 million, those kinds of people need a hotel. So let's rhyme with that. He picked his audience, and then he built something for them. And certainly that's what Condé Nast did for 50 years, right? The kind of person who reads Gourmet is not the kind of person that reads Architectural Digest. Pick your audience first. You don't have to be super specific, but it certainly helps if you can be clear about who that tribe is and what they need from you.
Yeah, okay. So to the people that are listening that are starting to think, okay, cool, I want to start something now. I'm inspired by Seth. I get it. I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway because I have to be consistent. Like, what would you advise them? Like, what's the first thing they should do?
Well, I guess if we're talking about someone who is actually as novice as you are describing, I would pick an audience you don't want to serve for the long haul and practice on them, right? So let's say you live near a figure skating rink, which means that there's 100 people who go figure skating every day. What do they need? What innovation would make their life better? What might they buy from you? Go practice on them. And if you fall on your face, you never have to go back to the figure skating rink again. It's invisible. Mm-hmm. Practice over there, practice over there, practice. So I started in the book packaging business because the beauty of it is you've got 2 stamps. You could send a letter to anybody in the book industry, and if they liked your idea, they would mail you money. And I got 800 rejections in a row. I was a complete failure, but no one knew that I was getting 800 rejections because each person only rejected me 20 times. And eventually I figured it out. I got the joke. And so I could play in that space. And then when the web came along, it's a totally different group of people. But I knew how to pitch idea people, so I could go pitch AOL. And I crushed it at AOL because I was better. AOL had this greenhouse thing where you could pitch them an idea and they would meet. I broke the record for the fastest yes. 14 minutes after I pitched them, they agreed to give me 6 figures for my project. How did that happen? Because I've been pitching the book industry for 15 years, right? So you pick your minor leagues, then go to your next leagues. That's how I would begin.